You ever have one of those moments where you just know something's wrong? Like deep in your gut, everything's screaming at you, but you try to ignore it because it feels too crazy to believe? That's exactly how I felt that night. It was supposed to be a 3-day work trip. Nothing special, just a conference a few states over. My flight back got cancelled because of a storm, but I managed to book a last-minute ticket on another airline and decided to surprise my wife, Emily. I thought she'd be happy to see me home early. I thought I'd be happy too. Man, I couldn't have been more wrong. I pulled into the driveway a little after 10 p.m. The house was dark, but her car was in the garage. Figured she might have gone to bed early. She'd mentioned she wasn't feeling great when I called that afternoon. But when I walked through the door, I noticed something off immediately. Her shoes weren't by the door like they usually were. The living room light was dim, and there was an empty wine bottle and 2 glasses on the coffee table. My stomach sank. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she had a friend over? Maybe her sister stopped by? I headed upstairs, hoping to hear her snoring or binge-watching one of her true crime shows. Instead, I heard laughter. It was muffled, but it was coming from our bedroom. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I couldn't move for a second, just stood there, holding my breath. Then I heard her voice. Her laugh. The one I'd fallen in love with. And then his. I don't know how I got to the door, but the next thing I knew, I was standing outside the room. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see them, her and some guy tangled up in the sheets of our bed. My bed. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My head started spinning, and my chest felt tight. I wanted to scream, to burst in there and demand answers, but instead, I stepped back into the shadows. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures. Evidence. I didn't even know why I was doing it, but something in me told me I'd need proof. I stumbled downstairs, trying to breathe. My mind was racing. Should I confront them? Leave? Call someone? I ended up sitting in my car in the driveway, staring at the steering wheel like it could give me answers. I felt numb, but beneath it, there was this slow-burning rage building. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. My life was never going to be the same after that night. I barely slept that night. I stayed in the car, staring at the house like a stranger, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Around 3 a.m., the lights went out upstairs, and I figured they'd gone to sleep. I still couldn't bring myself to go inside. Just thinking about it made my skin crawl. The worst part? I kept hoping it wasn't real. That I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd walk back in, and she'd be alone, waiting for me, and we'd laugh about how paranoid I'd been. But every time I glanced at those pictures on my phone, the truth hit me like a brick. There was no coming back from this. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed more than just a couple of blurry pictures. I needed everything. If she was willing to betray me like that, I needed to know how far it went, how long it had been happening. I needed to protect myself. Around 7 a.m., I saw him leave. Tall guy, dark hair, probably mid-30s. He looked way too casual for someone who'd just destroyed a marriage, like he didn't have a care in the world. I clenched my fists as I watched him stroll to his car, but I stayed put. Blowing up now would do more harm than good. Once he drove off, I finally went back inside. The house felt different, colder somehow, like the betrayal was seeping out of the walls. The wine glasses were still on the coffee table, along with her phone. She always left it lying around, one of the few things she trusted me with, I guess. I picked it up, half expecting her to come running down the stairs, but she didn't. I unlocked it. I knew her passcode. We'd never kept secrets before. As I scrolled through her messages, the sick feeling in my stomach got worse. There were dozens of texts between her and someone named Ryan. Some of them were innocent enough, jokes, random updates about their day, but others, not so much. Ryan, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Emily, same here. You make me feel so alive. Ryan, wish I didn't have to leave so soon. Next time, let's plan a whole weekend. Emily, I'd love that. I'll figure something out. I slammed the phone down on the counter, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a fling. They'd been talking for months, planning meetups, sharing their feelings. It wasn't just about sex, it was emotional. That hurt more than I thought it would. Emily came downstairs a little while later, looking groggy and wearing the same robe she'd had on the night before. When she saw me, her eyes widened for a split second, but she covered it up with a smile. "Hey, you're home early," she said, her voice too casual. I forced myself to stay calm. "Yeah, flight got rescheduled. Thought I'd surprise you." Her smile faltered. "Oh, that's nice." I nodded, studying her. She didn't seem nervous, just caught off guard. She made some excuse about needing coffee and hurried into the kitchen. I watched her from the doorway, wondering how she could act so normal after what I'd seen. It was like I didn't even know her anymore. "You okay?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." For now, I'd play along. Let her think everything was fine. But inside, I was already plotting my next move. After that awkward morning, I knew I couldn't sit around and pretend everything was normal. Emily acted like nothing was out of the ordinary, chattering about her plans for the day, asking if I wanted to go out for dinner, even complaining about the weather. It was surreal. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep my anger and disgust in check, but every time I looked at her, all I could think about was Ryan. As soon as she left for work, I got to work. First, I backed up everything on her phone. Messages, emails, pictures, you name it. I'd seen enough movies to know you need receipts when the truth comes out. She had a habit of deleting her conversations, but not before screenshots could save them to her cloud account. Lucky for me, she never remembered to log out of her accounts on the home computer. What I found turned my stomach. There were more messages, more plans, more lies. It wasn't just a one-time thing or even a random hookup. It had been going on for at least 6 months. Ryan wasn't just some fling. He was someone she trusted, someone she cared about, and apparently someone she thought was worth risking everything for. I found hotel bookings under her name. One of them was from the week I was out of town on a different work trip. She told me she'd been visiting her mom that weekend. I even found a separate email account she'd used to coordinate their meetups. It felt like she'd built an entirely separate life behind my back. Then I found the pictures. They were mostly selfies, but one of them made my blood boil, a candid shot of the two of them at some outdoor cafe, holding hands. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, like he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. It was like I didn't exist in her world anymore. By the time Emily got home that evening, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I wanted to make sure I understood the full scope of her betrayal, and I needed time to figure out my own plan. That night, I couldn't look at her. Every word out of her mouth felt like poison, every smile a slap in the face. She noticed I was quiet, but she didn't push. Maybe she thought I was tired. Maybe she thought I'd never find out. When she went to bed, I stayed downstairs, scrolling through the evidence on my phone. I'd copied everything to a private folder, just in case. I felt numb, like my emotions had been drained out of me. I didn't even cry, I couldn't. All I could think about was what I was going to do next. The following day, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell them much, just that I discovered my wife was having an affair and I wanted to know my options. The lawyer asked about assets, bank accounts, and whether we had a prenuptial agreement. We didn't. They also told me to avoid confrontation until I had a plan in place, something about protecting myself legally. By the time I hung up, I had a better idea of what I needed to do. Step 1. Gather more evidence. Step 2. Secure my finances. Step 3. Get out before she knew what hit her. For the next few days, I played my part, pretending like everything was fine. I even kissed her goodbye in the mornings and asked about her day like I cared. But inside, I was watching, waiting, collecting every lie she fed me. If she was going to betray me, I'd make sure she didn't get away with it. Then I found the pictures. They were mostly selfies, but one of them made my blood boil, a candid shot of the two of them at some outdoor cafe, holding hands. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, like he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. It was like I didn't exist in her world anymore. By the time Emily got home that evening, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I wanted to make sure I understood the full scope of her betrayal, and I needed time to figure out my own plan. That night, I couldn't look at her. Every word out of her mouth felt like poison, every smile a slap in the face. She noticed I was quiet, but she didn't push. Maybe she thought I was tired. Maybe she thought I'd never find out. When she went to bed, I stayed downstairs, scrolling through the evidence on my phone. I'd copied everything to a private folder, just in case. I felt numb, like my emotions had been drained out of me. I didn't even cry, I couldn't. All I could think about was what I was going to do next. The following day, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell them much, just that I discovered my wife was having an affair and I wanted to know my options. The lawyer asked about assets, bank accounts, and whether we had a prenuptial agreement. We didn't. They also told me to avoid confrontation until I had a plan in place, something about protecting myself legally. By the time I hung up, I had a better idea of what I needed to do. Step 1. Gather more evidence. Step 2. Secure my finances. Step 3. Get out before she knew what hit her. For the next few days, I played my part, pretending like everything was fine. I even kissed her goodbye in the mornings and asked about her day like I cared. But inside, I was waiting, collecting every lie she fed me. If she was going to betray me, I'd make sure she didn't get away with it. For a while, everything stayed quiet. Emily carried on like nothing was wrong, and I kept playing along, but I could feel the cracks forming. Every conversation felt like a performance. Every time she kissed me or smiled at me, I wanted to pull away, but I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the explosion that would come when the truth came out. Then, about a week later, she slipped up. It was a Friday evening, and Emily had just gotten home from work. She told me she had plans with her friends and wouldn't be back until late. Normally, I'd encourage her to go out and have fun, but this time I asked a few casual questions. Who was going, where they were meeting, when she'd be back. She rattled off a list of names, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made me suspicious. After she left, I checked the tracking app we'd installed on our phones years ago when we both started traveling more for work. She didn't know I still had it set to notify me of her location. I opened the app and saw her little moving across town, not toward the restaurant she'd mentioned, but to a hotel. The same hotel I'd seen in the email receipts. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my keys and followed her. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew I couldn't just sit at home and wait. When I pulled into the parking lot, her car was there, parked near the entrance. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to calm down and decide what to do. Eventually, I decided to go inside. The receptionist looked up as I walked in. I asked if I could use the restroom, and they pointed me toward the hallway. As I walked past the front desk, I noticed the elevator doors closing, and there she was, standing next to Ryan. He had his hand on her lower back, guiding her into the elevator like they were a couple. I froze, my whole body tensing up. I wanted to shout her name, to call her out right there in front of everyone, but I stopped myself. Instead, I turned and left the building, my hands shaking with rage. Back in my car, I opened my phone and checked the app again. The notification said she was on the 6th floor. I wanted to go up there, to bang on the door and force her to face me, but I knew it wasn't the right move. Instead, I started recording a video of myself, describing everything I'd seen and how I felt in that moment. I didn't know what I'd do with the video. It wasn't exactly evidence, but it felt like a way to hold on to the truth, to make sure I didn't forget the raw emotions of that moment. When she came home later that night, smelling faintly of wine and perfume, she smiled at me like nothing had happened. "Did you have fun?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Yeah, it was nice to catch up with everyone," she said, slipping off her shoes and heading upstairs. I just sat there staring after her, trying to wrap my head around how someone could lie so easily, so casually, without even blinking. That was the moment I decided I couldn't wait much longer. The next morning, I woke up feeling more focused than I had in days. Last night had been the final straw. Watching her walk through the door, acting like everything was fine, made me realize I couldn't let this drag on any longer. Every day she got to live her double life felt like a win for her and a loss for me. I couldn't let her win. I spent the day setting my plan into motion. First, I called the lawyer again and explained the situation in more detail. I told them about the evidence I'd gathered, messages, pictures, the hotel visit. They walked me through the process of filing for divorce and what I needed to do to protect myself financially. "You need to document everything," the lawyer said. "The more proof you have, the better. And don't confront her until you're ready to act. Let her think you don't know anything." It was good advice, but it was hard to follow. Every moment I spent under the same roof with her made my skin crawl. I kept my cool though, knowing I had to stay quiet until the time was right. Step 2 was securing my finances. I'd already checked our joint accounts earlier in the week, and thankfully, Everything looked normal, no suspicious withdrawals or transfers. Still, I decided to open a new account in my name only and moved a portion of my paycheck into it. I didn't take too much. I didn't want her to notice anything unusual, but I needed a safety net in case things went south quickly. Next, I started looking for a place to stay. I didn't want to leave the house just yet, but I needed a backup plan. I found a short-term rental about 10 minutes away and put down a deposit. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom apartment, but it was clean, furnished, and ready to move into whenever I needed it. By the time Emily got home that evening, I had everything in place. She breezed through the door like she didn't have a care in the world, dropping her bag on the counter and kissing me on the cheek. "Hey babe," she said. "How was your day?" I forced a smile. "Good. Just ran some errands. How about you?" "Oh, same old, same old." It amazed me how easily she lied, how effortlessly she pretended everything was normal. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her squirm. But I held back. I wasn't ready yet. We ate dinner together, talking about mundane things like work and the weather, and I found myself studying her every move. Did she feel guilty? Did she regret what she was doing? Or was she so wrapped up in her fantasy with Ryan that she didn't even care? That night, as she fell asleep next to me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing with thoughts of what was to come. I knew the confrontation would be messy, painful, and ugly, but it was inevitable. I just had to be ready. The following week was a waiting game. I kept gathering evidence, carefully watching Emily's every move. She went about her life as if nothing had changed, laughing, chatting, even cuddling up to me on the couch. It was infuriating, but I forced myself to stay patient. The longer I waited, the more I learned. Then came the moment that pushed me over the edge. It was a Thursday evening. Emily had been acting a little off all day, checking her phone more than usual, smiling at texts she wouldn't share, and brushing off my questions with vague answers. That night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. I couldn't help myself. I unlocked it and read the message. "Ryan, counting down the hours, babe. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Tomorrow? She hadn't mentioned any plans for Friday. My stomach churned as I scrolled up through their conversation. It was all there, a detailed plan to spend the weekend together. She'd told him she was taking a business trip out of town and had already booked another hotel. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. This wasn't just another affair. She was planning to spend an entire weekend with him, lying to my face in the process. When she came back into the bedroom, towel drying her hair, I forced myself to act normal. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at me. "Yeah," I said, slipping her phone back onto the nightstand. "Just tired." She climbed into bed beside me, completely unaware of what I'd just uncovered. As she drifted off to sleep, I sat there in the dark, fuming. I couldn't wait any longer. This was it. Tomorrow, she'd get exactly what she deserved. The next morning, Emily was up early, packing a small suitcase and chatting about her work trip. I played along, even offering to help her load the car. Inside, I was boiling with rage, but I kept my voice steady. "Have a good trip," I said, giving her a hug. She kissed my cheek. "Thanks, babe. I'll call you when I get there." I watched her drive away, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. As soon as she was out of sight, I sprang into action. I called her work to confirm what I already knew. They had no idea she was going anywhere. Then I called my lawyer. "She's spending the weekend with him," I said. "Can we use this?" "Absolutely," the lawyer replied. "If you can confirm she's meeting him, it'll strengthen your case." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the camera I'd borrowed from a friend earlier that week. I wasn't just going to confirm it, I was going to document everything. Emily's texts had given me all the information I needed. I knew the hotel, the time, and even the room number. When I arrived, I parked across the street and waited. It didn't take long. Less than an hour later, Emily's car pulled into the lot, followed by Ryan's. They got out, laughing and holding hands, and walked inside together. I snapped picture after picture, my heart pounding with every shot. This was it. Proof of everything. For a moment, I considered confronting them right there in the lobby, but I decided against it. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a scene. Instead, I sent the pictures to my lawyer and waited for her instructions. Now all I had to do was wait for the right moment to confront her. The pictures were enough. I knew it, my lawyer knew it, and soon, Emily would know it too. But I couldn't let her walk back into our house like nothing had happened. I needed her to face what she'd done, to see the pain she'd caused me. I didn't want a screaming match, I wanted the truth, even if it hurt. That evening, I drove home and waited. I didn't call or text her, though I could see she'd tried messaging me a few times throughout the day. I ignored them. By the time I heard her car pull into the driveway, my heart was pounding. She walked in with that same casual smile she always wore after coming home. "Hey babe," she called out, dropping her bag by the door. I stayed seated at the dining table, the photos spread out in front of me. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "What's all this?" she asked, taking a step closer. "Sit down," I said, my voice low and steady. Her eyes flicked to the pictures, and her face went pale. "Max, I can explain." "Sit." She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair across from me. I watched her carefully, noting the way her hands trembled as she reached for one of the photos. It was a shot of her and Ryan walking into the hotel, his arm around her waist. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the picture, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said. I scoffed, leaning back in my chair. "Not what it looks like. You're really going to try that? Because I've got messages, hotel receipts, and now pictures. So why don't you drop the lies and tell me the truth for once?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "That's not an answer," I shot back. "How long, Emily?" She looked down, avoiding my gaze. 6 months. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I already knew. Hearing her say it made it real in a way nothing else had. I clenched my fists under the table, struggling to keep my composure. "Why?" I asked after a long silence. She looked up at me then, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she said softly. "It just happened." I laughed bitterly. "It just happened? That's your excuse? You accidentally fell into an affair for half a year." "No," she said, shaking her head. I wasn't happy, Max. I felt like we were drifting apart, and Ryan, he made me feel seen. Seen. I repeated, my voice rising. "I've been here the whole time, Emily. You're the one who checked out of this marriage, not me." She flinched but didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "Do you love him?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her breath hitched. "I don't know." I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "You don't know? Are you serious right now? You threw away everything we built together for someone you're not even sure about." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. I thought I could stop, but then what?" I interrupted. "You enjoyed sneaking around? Lying to me? Laughing behind my back with him?" She shook her head furiously. "No. Max, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You did." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of anger, sadness, and disgust. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but I knew that wasn't my place anymore. "You're going to pack a bag," I said finally, my voice steady. "And you're going to leave. Tonight." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Max, please." "No," I said, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear it. You made your choice, Emily. Now I'm making mine." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Then she nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't respond. I just watched as she stood up, grabbed her bag, and headed upstairs. When she came back down 20 minutes later, her suitcase in hand, she stopped by the door and turned to me. "I know you hate me right now," she said. "But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you." I looked at her, my expression blank. "You have a funny way of showing it." She opened her mouth to say something else, but then she seemed to think better of it. Without another word, she walked out the door, leaving me alone in the silence of our broken home. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The house felt eerily quiet the next morning. Emily's things were gone, Her presence wiped away like she was never there. Part of me expected to feel relief, maybe even triumph. Instead, I just felt hollow. I spent the morning cleaning. I scrubbed the counters, vacuumed the floors, and tossed out anything that reminded me of her. The wine glasses from that night? Gone. The throw blanket she always used on the couch? Into the donation pile. It was petty, I knew, but I couldn't stand the thought of her lingering in the corners of my life. By the time I finished, the house was spotless, but I still felt restless. I sat down at the dining table, staring at the folder of evidence I'd collected. It was a bitter comfort, knowing I'd done everything right to protect myself, but it didn't make the pain go away. Around midday, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my lawyer. Lawyer, I've filed the initial paperwork. You should have everything in writing by the end of the week. Let me know if she contacts you or tries anything. I stared at the message for a long time. It was the first tangible step toward cutting ties with Emily for good, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like closing a door I never wanted to close. That afternoon, I called my best friend, Jake. I hadn't told him much about what was going on, just that things with Emily were rough. When he picked up, his voice was cheerful, but that changed as soon as he heard mine. Max? What's going on, man? You sound like crap. I need to talk, I said. Say no more. I'll be there in 20. True to his word, Jake showed up with a six-pack and a bag of takeout. He didn't push me to talk right away, just sat with me in the living room, flipping through channels while we ate. Finally, I told him everything. About Emily, about Ryan, about the evidence, and about how I'd confronted her. He didn't interrupt, just listened, his face growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he let out a long breath. Man, I don't even know what to say. That's brutal. Yeah, I said, staring at the empty beer bottle in my hand. You gonna be okay? I shrugged. Eventually. I think. Jake leaned back, crossing his arms. Look, Max, I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you did the right thing. You didn't let her keep lying to you. You stood up for yourself. Doesn't feel like it, I muttered. It will, he said firmly. One day, you'll look back on this and be glad you didn't stay with someone who didn't respect you. Trust me. That night, after Jake left, I sat alone in the quiet house, replaying his words in my head. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier. I missed the life I thought I had with Emily, the future we'd planned together. It was hard to let go of that, even knowing it was built on lies. I opened my laptop and started searching for therapists in the area. I wasn't sure if I'd actually go through with it, but I figured it couldn't hurt to try. If I was going to move on, I needed to start somewhere. As I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. My stomach twisted as I opened the message. Unknown, Max, it's me. Can we please talk? Just one more time. I need to explain everything. Emily. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to respond, to demand answers for the questions still swirling in my head. But another part of me, the part that had spent the last few weeks gathering evidence and preparing for this moment, knew better. I blocked the number and set the phone down, my chest heavy but resolute. Some doors are meant to stay closed. The days following Emily's departure were a blur of emotions, grief, anger, and moments of unexpected calm. I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy, but reminders of her seemed to creep in everywhere. A receipt for her favorite coffee shop tucked in my car's console. Her handwriting on a sticky note stuck to the fridge. A scarf she'd left hanging on the back of a chair. Each one felt like a sucker punch, pulling me back to memories I didn't want to revisit. One evening while organizing the closet, I found an old box of photos, our wedding, trips we'd taken, the life we'd built together. I sat down, flipping through the pictures, feeling the weight of what I'd lost. But as I stared at one photo of us smiling on a beach, I realized something. I missed the person I thought Emily was, not the person she turned out to be. That gave me a strange kind of strength. I packed the photos away, along with everything else that reminded me of her, and set the box in the garage. Out of sight, out of mind, for now. It wasn't closure, but it was a start that a week after Emily left, I was starting to settle into a routine. The house was quiet, and while it still felt strange, I was beginning to reclaim the space as my own. Then she showed up. It was late in the afternoon when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my stomach sank as I walked to the door. When I opened it, there she was, Emily, standing on the porch with a strained smile and a small box in her hands. "Max," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, gripping the doorframe, torn between slamming it shut and letting her in. "Please," she added. "It won't take long." Reluctantly, I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence hanging between us. She placed the box on the coffee table and pushed it toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "Some of your things I had at my mom's place," she said. "And some letters. I wrote them to explain everything. I didn't think you'd want to talk to me, so—" I stared at the box, my jaw tightening. "You didn't need to come here for this. You could have mailed it." "I know," she said, her voice shaking. "But I needed to see you. To say I'm sorry. For everything." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but I didn't flinch. "You already said that," I replied coldly. "It doesn't change anything." She stayed for another minute, waiting for me to say more. When I didn't, she stood and headed for the door. "I'll leave you alone now," she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't watch her go. I just sat there, staring at the box she left behind. After a long moment, I opened it. Inside were a few trinkets, a sweater I thought I'd lost, and a stack of handwritten letters. I didn't read them. I wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, I shoved the box into the corner of the room and went for a walk, needing to clear my head. It was another reminder of how tangled our lives had been. Cutting those ties wasn't going to happen overnight. But I was determined to try. It took me a few days to work up the courage to open the box again. The letters had been sitting there, taunting me from the corner of the room. I wasn't sure why I even kept them. I'd made up my mind to move on. But something inside me needed to know what she'd written. One evening, after pacing the living room for what felt like hours, I sat down and opened the first envelope. Her handwriting was familiar but shaky, as if she'd been nervous writing it. "Max, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need you to know the truth. Not to justify what I did, but to help you understand why it happened. I owe you that much." The letter went on to explain how she'd felt disconnected from me for the past year. She described feeling like she was just going through the motions, and how Ryan had stepped in during a vulnerable moment. "He made me feel alive again," she wrote. "But it was a mistake. Every time I was with him, I felt guilt eating away at me. I wanted to stop so many times, but I didn't know how to untangle myself from the mess I'd made." Each letter was more of the same: apologies, regrets, and attempts to explain her actions. She insisted she'd never stopped loving me, that she'd wanted to work on our marriage but didn't know how to admit what she'd done. I read them all in one sitting, my emotions swinging between anger and sadness. Some of her words felt genuine, but others rang hollow, like excuses dressed up as explanations. By the time I finished, I was exhausted. I folded the letters and put them back in the box, unsure if I ever wanted to look at them again. That night, as I lay in bed, one sentence kept replaying in my mind: "I never wanted to hurt you, Mac." But she did. And no amount of apologies could change that. After reading the letters, I spent days processing everything Emily had written. Her words stirred up old memories, good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. I found myself replaying moments from our marriage, wondering when the disconnect she described had started. Had I missed the signs? Could I have done something differently? But every time I started to feel a pang of regret, I reminded myself of the betrayal. No matter how she framed it, she had choices. She chose to lie. She chose Ryan. One evening, I sat down with my lawyer to go over the next steps in the divorce process. We discussed dividing assets, timelines, and what to expect. Emily hadn't contested anything yet, and part of me wondered if that was her way of making amends. "You're in a good position," the lawyer said. "As long as you stay focused, this can be over quickly." That's what I wanted: closure. To end this chapter of my life and move on. The following week, Emily reached out again. This time, it was a letter in the mail. It was shorter than the others, but the message was clear. "Max, I understand now that I can't undo the damage I've done. I'm letting go of any claims to the house or our savings. I just want to give you the chance to start fresh. You deserve that. I hope one day you'll find peace." It was bittersweet, but I appreciated the gesture. For the first time, it felt like she was truly stepping back and acknowledging the hurt she'd caused without trying to justify it. That night, I took the box of letters and trinkets she'd returned and carried it to the garage. I placed it on a shelf, out of sight but not forgotten. It wasn't closure yet, but it was the beginning of acceptance. I realized then that moving forward wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning to live with it and not letting it define me. The weeks after Emily's letter were a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, I had the space to focus on myself, but that didn't mean it was easy. Letting go of a relationship I had invested so much in felt like stepping into a void. I started small. Simple routines helped ground me, going for morning runs, cooking meals I enjoyed, and reorganizing the house to make it feel more like my home instead of our home. I repainted the bedroom, swapped out the old bedspread, and even hung a few pictures I'd always liked but Emily had never been a fan of. It felt good to reclaim the space, to make it mine again. But there were hard days too. The silence in the house could be deafening, and sometimes, memories of happier times with Emily hit me out of nowhere. Like when I found an old recipe card tucked in a cookbook with her handwriting on it. Or when I heard a song we used to sing along to in the car. At first, those moments felt like gut punches. They reminded me of everything I thought I had lost. But over time, I began to reframe them. Instead of seeing them as painful reminders, I tried to see them as just that, moments. Pieces of a life that had its good parts, even if it didn't last. I also started therapy. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd need, but after everything, I figured it couldn't hurt. The first few sessions were tough. Talking about the betrayal felt like ripping off a scab, but my therapist helped me see patterns I hadn't noticed before. "It's okay to feel angry," she said one day when I admitted I still replayed the confrontation in my head. "Anger is part of healing. But it's important to let that anger move through you instead of letting it control you." Easier said than done, but I was trying. One day, about a month after Emily moved out, I ran into an old friend at the coffee shop. Sarah and I had worked together years ago, and we'd always gotten along well, but we drifted apart after I got married. "Max," she said, her face lighting up in recognition. "Wow, it's been ages." We ended up sitting down together, catching up over coffee. She talked about her job, her dog, and a disastrous dating app experience that had me laughing for the first time in what felt like forever. "What about you?" she asked. "How's Emily?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "We're not together anymore. Things ended a few months ago." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay?" "I'm getting there," I said, surprised by how true the words felt. Sarah and I started meeting up occasionally after that, grabbing coffee, going for hikes, or just chatting about life. It wasn't romantic, and I wasn't ready for it to be. But it felt good to have someone to talk to, someone who didn't know every detail of my life but cared enough to listen. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat on the back porch with a beer, watching the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of peace. Emily's betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, and I was beginning to see a future for myself, a future that wasn't tied to her or the pain she'd caused. Just as I was starting to piece my life back together, the past came knocking one last time. It started with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Max, it's me." Emily's voice was hesitant, almost trembling. I gripped the phone tighter, every muscle in my body tensing. "What do you want?" I need to talk to you," she said. "It's important. Please, can we meet?" I should have hung up right then and there, but curiosity got the better of me. Part of me wanted to believe she was finally ready to take full accountability or say something to bring closure. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop the next day. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of untouched coffee. She looked tired, her once polished demeanor replaced by a fragile, almost desperate appearance. "Thanks for coming," she said softly as I sat down. "Make it quick," I replied, keeping my tone cold. She fidgeted with her coffee cup for a moment before looking up at me. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like a grenade, ready to explode. My stomach churned as a wave of nausea hit me. "What are you saying?" I managed to ask. "It's yours," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. "No," I said flatly. "You don't get to pull this now. After everything you've done, you expect me to believe this is mine." She flinched at my words. It is, Max. I swear. I haven't been with Ryan since we ended. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. And I'm supposed to trust you now? After all the lies? You've got to be kidding me. Please, Max, she pleaded. I know I've hurt you, but this is the truth. I'm trying to do the right thing. I stood up, my heart pounding. Get a test, I said coldly. If it's mine, we'll figure something out. But don't expect me to believe a word you say until there's proof. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't stick around to watch. I walked out of the coffee shop, my mind racing. 2 weeks later, I got the results. The child was mine. For a moment, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I thought I was free of her, free to move on, but now I was tethered to her forever. She tried reaching out again, claiming she wanted to co-parent amicably, but I couldn't stomach the idea of working with her. Every interaction felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. In the months that followed, my life became a cycle of court hearings, custody arrangements, and tense exchanges with Emily. The child, a son, was innocent in all this, and I tried my best to separate my feelings about her from my role as a father. But it was hard. The resentment lingered. The betrayal festered. And as much as I tried to focus on my son, there was always a part of me that couldn't let go of the bitterness. Sometimes, I'd sit in the quiet of the night, wondering how things had gone so wrong. I'd picture the life I thought I'd have, the family I thought I'd build, and I'd feel the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me. The truth was, I wasn't sure I'd ever heal completely. Emily's betrayal had scarred me in ways I couldn't yet understand. And now, no matter how much distance I tried to put between us, she would always be there, a constant reminder of the life I'd been forced to leave behind. Some endings don't tie up neatly. Some wounds don't fully heal. And some betrayals leave marks that time alone can't erase.